Welcome to a ride on the outside. MMA is full of people on the inside, but what about the ones that watch from beyond? Welcome to the MMA Outsiders with Tom Albano and Zain Bando on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network.
Yes, the MMA Outsiders is finally back. Tom Albano here along with Zain Bando. Zain, it's good to see you. We've been thinking about you, and it's good that you're back this week because there's just so much in combat to talk about. Boxing, MMA on the PFL side and on the Bellator side, and maybe a little UFC here and there. But how you doing?
I'm doing very well, and again, thank you very much for the well wishes and the kind words over the last week on your shorts. They were very it's appreciated, and just the support across the network has been great. I'm glad to be back. I'm glad to be in a good spot, and truly the support was just extremely amazing. And thank you again for being so caring during such a difficult time. And thank you to the viewers and the listeners of this show that rely on me every single week. Thank you for your understanding and circumstance. But it's great. It's great to be back.
Absolutely. Before we get into anything, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you get notified of everything here at the Empty the Bench Network, including every episode of the MMA Outsiders. And once again, I am Tom Albano. You can find my work over at Fan-Sided MMA as well as with the PFL. Obviously, we got the big championship cards coming up. The global card is in November, the Europe card in December, and you can follow me on social media at Thomas J. Albano. To my right, as always, is Zain Bando, a staff writer for BJPenn.com, a Bellator Rankings committee member, and you can find his work on social media over at ZainBando99. And you can make sure to follow the Empty the Bench Network at ETB Network, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok. And you can follow us on social media, Facebook, X, and Instagram at MMA Outsiders ETB. Of course, don't forget to take the MMA Outsiders and the rest of the Empty the Bench Network on the road with you on Acast and our audio-only platforms. And if you are listening on those audio-only platforms, make sure to come to YouTube, youtube.com/ETB Network, hit that subscribe button, and watch us on our home video feed. Past 560 subscribers, so keep on the climb. All right, Zain, a lot we got to get through with this episode. Obviously, we had a big Canelo fight this past weekend, which ended up being very one-sided. We have Bellator 300 coming up. One of the biggest cards in Bellator history, if not the biggest card in Bellator history. But all that has been trumped. And I say that with a very big grain of salt. And the reason is I want to lead off with reports that came out from some very credible sources, I should say, by the way. Most of the boxing reporter front, our big guys like Coppinger and all of them, that Tyson Fury versus Oleksandr Usyk, the undisputed heavyweight title fight, the one that we have been longing for, the one that, Zain, I once said that it feels like an undisputed heavyweight title fight would never happen again. And according to multiple sources, multiple verified sources, this fight is signed and it will take place in Saudi Arabia, either on December 23rd or at some point in January. Zain, I don't know about you, but you know my feelings about these boxing fights, especially when it comes to the heavyweight champions, and particularly the undisputed title fight between Tyson Fury and Oleksandr Usyk, because we say time and time again that boxing manages to get in its own way. And I can kind of say that with here, considering that, Tyson Fury is just a few weeks away from going into that fight with Francis Ngannou. And it's weird that this is coming out now, and the fact that it might only be a couple of months after that Ngannou fight that he faces Usyk for the undisputed heavyweight championship. And yet, there's this weird feeling in me, Zain, that wants it to happen because it's an undisputed heavyweight title fight, something that we have not seen basically for most of this millennium. Like the last time was when Lennox Lewis ended up defeating Evander Holyfield for the championships in like the last big fight of 1999. And yet, and that's when I mean an undisputed champion was crowned, where we had one champion versus another. And yet, it's signed. The Saudis say it's going to happen. The big reporters are saying it's going to happen. So I don't know, Zain. Should I be taking this with a grain of salt, or should I be hopeful? I can't believe I'm saying that about boxing, but hopeful.
Well, I mean, it's great that you mentioned it, and it's great that we're leading off with this, because the magnitude of this fight, to me, would be an understatement to say it is massive. It is beyond massive. I mean, these are the two biggest, baddest heavyweights on the planet that have been chomping at the bit for over a year and a half to get in the ring and punch each other, and now we're less than 3 months away from potentially seeing the biggest heavyweight boxing championship fight of our lifetime, presumably. I know you're a little bit older than me, but it just feels like the countdown is on, and you can cut the tension with a knife, because if this buildup is what I think it's going to be a fight that we're never going to forget. And for the Saudis to get this fight done when they're getting it done, to say that they were going to go all in on the sport of boxing and they're living up to their promise, you have to give them a lot of credit. And to get Tyson Fury back in the ring less than 3 months after fighting Francis Ngannou in a fight that he doesn't have to necessarily compete in, but he is anyway. He's doing it for the prestige, and he's doing it because he wants to do it. This is a very, very, very interesting development in a fight that I think a lot of people are excited about, in a fight that I think a lot of the older boxing fans, the ones that haven't really been in touch with the sport for years, I think you're going to see a lot of the people, will come back that followed Tyson in the 90s, and, will watch the likes of Evander Holyfield, George Foreman, Michael Moore, some of the names that you would see, week to week, month to month on HBO Boxing. I think you're going to see a lot of those same people come back, because the fight just has that much mass appeal. And no, neither of these guys are American figures or anything like that, but Tyson Fury knows how to talk a big game, and really all you need is Tyson Fury to sell this fight, and I think people will be very interested. And I think, it's just going to be one of those where the anticipation is going to build. Once this date is official, whether it's December 23rd, sometime in January, sometime in 2024, I think people are going to be interested. People are going to be invested. People are going to want to buy the pay-per-view. And you have to give credit to all parties involved, because as you said a couple months ago, you were kind of speculating that, okay, maybe an undisputed heavyweight title fight would never happen again. And here we are. And I think as boxing purists and people that have started to get back into the sport over the last year and a half, with the rise and emergence of all these new stars and contenders, there really is truly not a better time to be a boxing fan right now. And this just adds to the prestige and the excitement that, people who are maybe just getting into boxing, or people that, started to watch boxing in the last year. This is a fight that if I were a newer fan, I would be absolutely ecstatic about.
Oh, absolutely ecstatic about. And I got to give credit to boxing in that we actually have seen over the past year or so, a couple, at least at the lighter weight classes, we have seen more of the undisputed champions. But obviously, I mean, one perfect example is Canelo Alvarez, who we'll talk about towards the end of the show with his fight with Jermell Charlo. The other one being Terrence Crawford, who had that fight with Errol Spence Jr. and just absolutely blew everybody away with how easily he handled Spence. But obviously, the big money has always been with, I shouldn't say always, it's not exclusive, but the heavyweights always were the big money. They always were during that time of the 1990s where, as you mentioned, all those previous names would come out every few months or so for big pay-per-view fights. And Tyson Fury is a big pay-per-view draw. Oleksandr Usyk, I mean, he's still, getting there, but I mean, he beat Anthony Joshua, beat him twice for the heavyweight championships. So I would call him a draw. And Tyson Fury, he is a draw, and that is why we got this Tyson Fury versus Francis Ngannou fight. Because you know what else he's fighting for, Zan?
All the money.
Big payday.
Because now reports are coming out that Tyson Fury is expected to make over $100 million just for stepping in the ring with Francis Ngannou. If you were to tell me that 5 years ago, I would have laughed you out of the room. I'm like, wait a minute. How my first question 5 years ago would have been, how does Tyson Fury become heavyweight champion? Number one, and number two, my second question would have been, why is Francis Ngannou no longer in the UFC? And here we are.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Here we are. And Zan, let's be real. If this undisputed heavyweight title fight goes through like it should, that's another big payday for Tyson Fury. Could be in line for two big paydays within the span of 3 or 4 months. One of them being the Francis Ngannou fight, which is just a crossover, I guess, exhibition of sorts, and then the other, one of the biggest championship fights in boxing history. So, I mean, you got to give credit to Tyson.
I mean, hey, even if Tyson Fury gets viciously knocked out by Usyk, there's a major money-making rematch waiting for him probably a couple months later. So if you're Tyson Fury, these next 4 months are a win-win situation, no matter how you slice it. And you can't say that about other fighters, but given Tyson Fury's stature and what he's been able to do for the sport, I think he's in for a very, very nice next several months from a financial perspective. I wanted to ask you this question. You were talking about Oleksandr Usyk as being a draw amongst the hardcore boxing purists in the hardcore boxing community. For American fans that don't know who Usyk is, if you were a promoter, if you were a pay-per-view provider, what is your pitch point to the average American consumer that maybe watches boxing every so often, maybe every couple of years, maybe when the fight's being talked about by the mainstream media? What would be your biggest selling point about Usyk for someone who has no idea who he is?
I would say, I mean, Zan, just for the simple fact, and this to add to the high stakes of this fight, just popped into my head. Undefeated versus undefeated. And Oleksandr Usyk, in a way to answer your question, he cleared the division out, not at heavyweight, at cruiserweight, then goes up to heavyweight and challenges Anthony Joshua, who at one point was considered one of, if not the best professional boxer in the world, at least at heavyweight. And in the conversation amongst some of the others, granted, he had that slip up against Andy Ruiz Jr. in 2019 at the Garden. And he thoroughly beats him. Not once, but twice. Wins the belts back, and then what happened?
Oh, I was just pointing to for twice. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, twice. So I think that should be a selling point within itself. And then Tyson Fury, I mean, all you got to do is for Tyson Fury, just talk about how he beat Vladimir Klitschko for the heavyweight championships and one of the biggest upsets in boxing history.
And that was when Vladimir Klitschko was at the height of his powers. But that was, if you want to talk about upsets back then, that was as wild and as unexpected as you could possibly get.
Mm-hmm. And then takes a couple of years off, has to deal with personal issues, and then has the draw against Deontay Wilder, which, if it wasn't for that second knockdown, he probably would have won that fight. Mm-hmm. And then just thoroughly bashes Wilder twice more, keeps retaining his title with spectacular finishes. So I feel like you got to sell the point, like they're both undefeated fighters. How in Usyk's case, he cleared out one division, went up to another, and then thoroughly handled a guy who had 3 of the 4 alphabet heavyweight championships. And then with Fury, I know you were specific about Usyk, but with Fury, talking about how he's the drawing power, himself, his history with Klitschko and Wilder, and then just the fact that he's taken this fight a few months after facing Francis Ngannou in a boxing MMA crossover boxing match. I think this fight has a lot to sell you on.
Yeah, and this may be a bold statement, and there may be old timers that will want to tear me apart and attempt to rip my head off virtually, of course. But I'm going to go out on a limb and say this is the biggest heavyweight title fight since Mike Tyson versus Evander Holyfield.
Ooh. I don't know about that one. I think that's showing a little disrespect to Mike Tyson versus Lennox Lewis in 2002.
Well, would you agree or disagree that Mike Tyson was starting to become a little bit past his prime?
Starting, yes, but I think, and I forget that there was a YouTuber who I watched who did like a really good like hour-long video detailing the heavyweight division in the 90s, and he said that Tyson Lewis fight in 2002 was kind of the end of an era kind of fight. And I think that's why it's so significant in my mind, because it really was the end of an era.
Oh, you're thinking of Joseph Vincent.
Was it Joseph Vincent? I don't know. I don't know if that was his real name. I forget what the YouTube name of that thing was.
I know what you're talking about though.
Oh, Rummy's Corner.
Okay, yeah. That was years ago that he made that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's wild to think about. Anywho, and then I was just gonna say this. My early prediction on this fight is that I don't think it goes the distance, and I think it ends with one of these guys falling either face first or flat on their back on the canvas. And at the moment, I'm gonna pick Tyson Fury in 8, but I would not be surprised if it goes either way. And I just know no matter who wins this fight, there's going to be some sort of bad blood, trash talk, stuff said afterward that is going to be very, very grim. I would think it's going to be very dark when that fight is over. I think there's pure hatred between these two, and I don't think they're going to be reconciling, at least for the next little bit, in my opinion.
I'm going to say Fury gets it done. I don't know if I want to say 8. I'd say 8 would be the minimum, if not, later on in the fight, in the last third of the fight. But I will say that I can kind of see your point. I know you mentioned that if Usyk wins, it sets up a big rematch. I think even if Fury wins, I think they're going to have some form of rematch. I don't see this being a one-fight deal. I see at least each fighter having some sort of rematch clause.
Okay, and then just briefly talking broadcast rights for a second. Do you think this is one of those where it's a DAZN ESPN partnership, or how do you think this fight's going to be distributed all over the world? If you had to guess,
Zan, if you're even thinking of DAZN having exclusive rights for this fight, it's a joke. No way would DAZN get exclusive rights for this. I mean, we'll rip on them again later with Canelo, but I mean, for all the stupid stuff that's happened with DAZN, combined with their $19.95 a month price tag, there's no way they can have exclusive rights. I can't see ESPN Plus having exclusive rights, but I think, considering the circumstances of this fight, I think this has to be one of those ESPN DAZN partnerships that it gets broadcasted all over the world.
Do you think there's any way possible, considering that the college football bowl season will have not taken full effect with its New Year's 6 games or anything like that? Is there any sort of chance linear ESPN joins in and at least airs the undercard? What do you think?
I'm fairly certain ESPN, linear ESPN, if not ESPN2, will probably air the undercard, prelims, whatever you want to call it. I don't know. I mean, on one end, and my day job, that December 23rd, would be the start of a nice little break. So being able to enjoy the fight Christmas weekend would be nice. On the flip side, I don't necessarily want to work Christmas weekend. So I would rather, if I'm going all out for this, that the fight happens in January, but,
Yeah, I mean, if the fight happens in January, at least we could do a full-on preview show and a full-on post-fight show without any distractions. So
absolutely. Yeah. So and again, like we talked about before we went on the air, I really hope that maybe that second weekend in January, where there's no UFC, or if there's anything, it's like one of those ESPN Plus cards that just starts off the year, that Fury Usyk is the big focus. Really that,
Yeah, Fury Usyk is the big focus right after the NFL playoff games are over, which would make a whole lot of sense. Yeah.
And if it's after December, there wouldn't necessarily be the college football bowl games to worry about. So January might be the smarter option.
I would think so too. If you were to guess a price point on this fight, are we looking at $85 or are we looking at $100?
No, I'm in the it's probably going to be $100.
Yeah, I think that this fight is big enough to go with that price tag. Could you see a world tour coming out of this fight potentially in New York and a couple of other international territories? What do you think?
I could see some sort of world tour. I could see some sort. But I mean, the question, Zan, is once again they're putting this fight not long after the Francis Ngannou showing, so I don't know how much time they're really going to have to build for this because Fury's got to build the rest of this month for the Ngannou showdown.
It's a very good point. They're going to have a lot to think about in terms of preparation. But if you want a boxing Super Bowl, folks, I think we have, and just to reiterate, Fury versus Usyk signed and delivered almost to either be December 23rd or at some point in January in Saudi Arabia. We will have you covered as that fight gets closer. There is more fighting, but this time we are moving back to the United States. And
Hold on, Zan. I need to throw one last question out there.
Okay.
And it's one that I will get laughed out of the building for, but because Ariel Helwani brought it up on his X account, and because, well, he's my PFL brethren, I have to put it out there.
Okay.
What if Francis Ngannou beats Tyson Fury this month?
There's going to be
what happens to this fight then?
There's going to be, let me just say this. There's going to be a lot of panicking in Saudi Arabia, the top rank offices, and every single person involved in the boxing department in Bristol, Connecticut, at a very popular 4-letter sports network in the United States that's going to be panicking like crazy if that ends up being the case.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that, it's boxing and it's exhibition, so really Fury's got the advantage at hand. But you know what? We've seen some crazy, what happened these last couple of years in combat sports. So let's not rule anything out.
And hey, with Mike Tyson training Francis Ngannou, anything's possible. So,
as Kevin Garnett once said, anything is possible.
It's damn right. He did say that. That's true.
All right, let's go back, as you said, to the United States. Let's talk about Francis's home, MMA home in the PFL, and let's talk about Bellator. Yes, Bellator has a very big card this weekend, and yes, I did say the last time we were together that at this point we should just shut up, and when the PFL and Bellator announce the purchase, it happens here. But I will give credit to Al Zullino. He did make a report, because last time we were here, Zan, you and I were discussing, Zullino saying the deal is done. Todd Atkins was saying the deal fell through and Bellator is going to fold. And the answer, Zan, is yes. Yes. They are both correct in the new Zullino report. In that, basically what's going to happen is, let's call it akin to what happened with the UFC in the Strike Force, or the UFC and the WEC. PFL is going to purchase Bellator, and the deal is done according to Zullino. What will happen is that Bellator will be run as its own promotion for a couple of years. The PFL will essentially give it some life support. And then eventually, after about 2 or 3 years, Bellator will finally fold.
Yeah. First off, shout out to Al Zullino for this, doing absolutely fine reporting on this story over the last couple of months. It's good to know that there's a little bit of closure. It's good to know that we're going to be down to 3 major MMA promotions here relatively soon, or I guess you could say, the 3 major MMA promotions here relatively soon. It's good to know that. It's just going to be very interesting to see if Bellator is only going to run for a couple of years, as he's alluding to. There's going to be a bunch of the roster that's going to not have a homes it's going to be interesting to see who the UFC decides to absorb and who they decide not to absorb, and how the UFC kind of all plays into this. The only thing Dana White has really said publicly about it is we'll see what happens. Well, looks like it looks like things are happening, because it looks like things are getting much, much closer to the PFL, or just being its own promotion in the next couple of years. I mean, I will say this: these next few events, there may be a happy connotation to it. There may be a somber connotation to it. This is regarding Bellator, of course, but at least we know that there is a little bit of closure, and at least we know that the future of Bellator is known. For a while we really didn't know what was going to happen with the promotion. At least we now know that there's a bit of clarity between both partners and what they are striving to do. And honestly, I really do hope this partnership works out for a couple of years, and that we get some of these fights that we've been waiting to see, these crossover fights that weren't possible before but are now entirely possible because of this. So I think there's a lot to be excited about if you're a fan of multiple MMA promotions.
Here's a question that I have, because during the PFL Europe semifinals card in Paris this past weekend, they were doing all the promotion about, how they're going to have, how they have PFL Europe now. They have the global PFL that we always watch. There's PFL. They're trying to start up PFL Africa. They're trying to start up PFL Saudi Arabia. Could you see, with all the expansion, because you mentioned the fighters not having a home, and that seems to be the thing, but with all the expansion and all the money that seems to be invested from the multiple investors from Saudi Arabia, could you see where the PFL says, you know what, instead of 6 divisions, now that we have Bellator and before the Bellator, why don't we do 8 divisions when we throw in middleweight and we throw in a lighter weight class, or we do another women's division? Could you see something like that happening?
I could see it, but I could also see the other side where all these other country titles, PFL Saudi Arabia, PFL, et cetera, I could see all of those being kind of mini contender series for systems in a way too. So I think it could be one of those two options.
And they did mention about the idea that some of these PFL Europe champions who win the $100,000 at the end of the season in Dublin in December could go on to the global stage next year in the 2024 season.
Yeah, it feels very much like a soccer / MLB based format, so it's nice to see that the PFL is trying to stick to it. So.
It's I know not a lot of people like it, but it's their thing, and it's what makes them unique. And sometimes you need these unique elements to stand out.
Yeah, well, unfortunately for PFL, the one thing that was not unique was the inaccessibility of the United States viewers over the weekend, who were unable to watch one of the most insane, fastest knockouts of 2023. We could briefly talk about it. Cedric Doumbe won in Paris over the weekend with a 9-second knockout in the main event in a fight that he made relatively easy. It's just the only issue is that there was no legitimate way in the United States for people to see it. But because the fight is so short, and if you have not seen it, you can just go on X through several different versions of it. Tom,
PFL uploaded it. SportsCenter uploaded it. I think the ESPN MMA account or normal ESPN account uploaded the whole fight, all 9 seconds.
I know you were busy. You were busy working this event, I presume. What was your initial reaction besides what we were exchanging back and forth when he won?
So I was trying to figure out, I was watching the initial movements. So I saw the initial, go in for the overhand, and I was like getting ready to write. Like here's how I was looking. Like I had the computer with the stream that I was watching was right here. And the computer I was writing up the stuff for the PFL website was right here. And so I have my eyes here, I have my fingers here. I see the initial how Doumbe's opponent was going in for the major hook, and I'm getting ready to write, and then all of a sudden, whoop whoop, and then I see him fall to the mat unconscious. I'm like, what the hell just happened? Like, it was like if I was doing one of those like silent streams because I'm like, I don't want to disturb anybody else because it's mid-afternoon here and everybody's home, but I'm like, like, oh my God, I cannot believe this happened. So, I mean, credit to the world, Cedric Doumbe, just, he's the man. He is the man. They signed him for a reason, and everyone was clamoring for him to go to the UFC for a reason. And, I mean, Zain, it was just an amazing debut. Say what you will about PFL Paris, say what you will about pacing. They made that debut so worth it. The crowd chanting along to the music as he was coming out. The mattress he came out with that said Bonne Nuit.
Yep.
To good night and had his opponent's name on it. I mean, I think, who did it better, that or Jared Cannon? I mean, Israel Adesanya coming out with Jared Cannonier's name on an urn. It was absolutely incredible. And then the freaking 9-second finish, which I think it was more like 8 or 7 seconds before the referee actually came in and waved off the fight. It was just, chef's kiss. That is probably one of the best, if not the best debut in MMA this year.
Oh, I think so too, and definitely shades of Todd Duffy versus Tim Hang all the way back in August of 2009. Because if you watch the way that Doumbe's opponent fell to the way that Tim Hang fell, it's very, very reminiscent and almost mind-blowing how similar both knockouts were. If you watch both of them side by side, there's a lot of insane similarities when you watch it over and over and over again. So that was my first thought. I'm like, oh my goodness, this is like a reenactment of Todd Duffy versus Tim Hang, except it's over a decade later. But yeah.
Yeah. And I know Doumbe competed in 4 MMA fights before, but this is his first time on a big stage with a big promotion like the PFL. And man, did he deliver. And I hope we get to see Cedric Doumbe, not exclusive to the PFL Europe stage. Hopefully we get to see him in the global PFL cage at some point.
Hopefully I can some way find a way to watch him in person, because I would love to be in one of his fights, no matter what state or city he's in. I'd like to at least see him once and say, yeah, I saw the man that was the PFL's biggest France superstar outside of Francis Ngannou. So that's just very cool to see. It was good for him.
For sure. All right, one other news story that we got to get to before we do all the previewing. Zain, Conor McGregor went on a podcast, and he says he's confirmed he's still focused on Chandler as his return opponent. And yet, this man thinks that despite what was announced for UFC 296, he still thinks that it's going to happen. He still thinks that he versus Chandler can happen in December at UFC 296. And all I got to say at this point is, can I tell you my thoughts about this with Conor? I've thought about it from last week when I was doing the solo video. And I've really thought about it. And I think Conor
was on crack.
Seriously, they just gave the main event spot for 296 to Leon and Colby, and you think that this fight is still going to happen in December? As part of this, Zain, let me give you the floor. So I talked about this last week, particularly the no Conor versus Chandler, it being official, not for 2023. Can I get your thoughts on this?
Well, first off, is my unofficial matchmaking genius or what? Because I called at least 2 of these announced fights, and I have to give myself a little pat on the back. But you want to talk about an end of the year that's just like one after another, where there's no event that you can't get excited about. I think the UFC over-delivered here. We have UFC 294 in Abu Dhabi with Oliveira and Makhachev. You have UFC 295 with Jones and Stipe, and of course you have the Alex Pereira title fight too against Yuri, which that will be unbelievable. And then you obviously have Leon Edwards and Colby Covington, and then of course you have Eval and Pantoja. You couldn't ask for a better end of the year. You really couldn't.
So then what of Conor and Chandler?
Well, I mean, I think as much as Conor would like to be hopeful that his fight with Chandler is going to happen this year, unless no one's told him, he should know that his precious main event spot has already been taken. So unless the UFC is willing to pull a on-field adjustment and two pay-per-view events in December, something to my knowledge they've never done in the history of the promotion, then he'll be waiting until 2024.
So they did do two events in 2016 and 2017 because they had the New Year's Eve cards, but they've stopped doing the New Year's Eve cards. Actually, they did it in 18 as well, but they haven't done those over the last few years. So I don't know what Conor's thinking. Plus, when they did it 16, 17, 18, it was one around the start of the month, particularly around the time of the Heisman Trophy being awarded, and then one was close to right around the end of the year. So in the case of 2023, Zain, if they somehow pulled that miracle, they would be doing one right the week before Christmas, and then they would probably do one at the end of the year, which would be absolutely insane.
Yeah, and from an ESPN perspective, I don't know how that's possible considering all of the content that they have for the month in other sports.
Yeah, so I don't think it's possible. And Zain, it's like what I said kind of last week. I don't think Conor has anyone to blame but himself on this one. He and Chandler not coming to terms. USADA, I don't know what's going on with USADA. But at this point, Zain, it's like what Chandler, Gaethje, and Poirier are all saying. Go piss in the cup.
Yeah, and literally. And, I think him not doing that just holds up his return plus a bunch of divisions even longer that that need to keep going, that are currently stagnant because they don't know when he's coming back.
Yeah. So, and it's like I said last week, Zain, actually something that we kind of made mention a couple weeks ago. I think at this point, the only way, and I think this is the last chance kind of way that this fight happens and saves some face, is if it's booked as the main event for UFC 300 in April or late March, whenever.
My theory is with the UFC not doing anything Super Bowl weekend in Vegas, as I was told by an anonymous source. My theory is it's probably either going to be UFC 299 or UFC 300 that Conor and Chandler end up competing. But then again, does the UFC really want to wait that long? I still think that in some ways there are negotiations, and even though the UFC keeps pushing it to next year, I think there are things that are going on behind the scenes at UFC headquarters that nobody knows about, where they're trying to save the fight. They just simply can't do it.
It's unfortunate because, like I said, TUF is basically a waste at this point because they spent all this time hyping up McGregor's return and they've got nothing for it.
No, absolutely. I think so. If you were to guess, when do you think Conor McGregor is going to come back? Do you think it's against Michael Chandler, or do you think it's against somebody else?
He's been saying that it has to be Chandler, so I'm going to hold him to his word that it has to be Chandler. And I'll just be very brutal with this. At this point, it has to be either Super Bowl weekend, which I don't know if that's going to be possible, or it's going to be UFC 300. Now, I did mention during my solo video, Zain, of something that I didn't pay attention to when we were doing your schedule outlook on episode 54. The one, because I remember you put UFC 300 as like the first Saturday in April. The one issue I could see with that is now that UFC and WWE are under one umbrella, that first Saturday in April is the first night of WrestleMania. I don't think they're going to have the UFC and WWE put their big premiere events on the same night.
So could you see it being the week after?
I could see it being the week before to be a late March card to do 2 March pay-per-views like they did this year, or doing it the week after, April 13th or whatever it would be.
Okay. But you're going out on a prediction that you think Conor will fight in 24 and it's not going to be by the end of 23.
I'll be blunt. If Conor McGregor does not return either Super Bowl weekend or UFC 300, he should not come back to the sport at all.
Really? And what makes you say that?
Because I'm tired of the waiting.
That's
I'm tired of it. I'm
nine-
tired of his waiting, especially considering that he hasn't had a meaningful win since 2016. Don't give me the Cowboy Cerrone crap. And and he has just had bad performance after bad performance. Because again, what if he loses this fight to Chandler? He's talking about it being the biggest comeback in MMA history, how he wants to fight Chandler, then fight Gaethje for the BMF, then have the trilogy with Nate. What if he loses this fight, especially after all this time away? It damages his credibility.
So then what do you think of Tony Ferguson coming out and saying that he's going to beat Paddy Pimblett and then he's going to talk about Conor McGregor afterward?
Well, the UFC, in my opinion, with Tony Ferguson taking on Paddy Pimblett, the UFC should be under investigation for poor treatment of its fighters, because why the hell are they letting Tony Ferguson compete again, especially against a killer like Paddy?
They shouldn't. At this current point in time, the fight is a mismatch. 5 years ago, it's a mismatch the other way around. This fight should not be taking place. And if you went back and listened to James Lynch's video, he made it very clear and said, oh, if Paddy Pimblett wins, the UFC is going to pull this narrative and they're going to say, this win was outstanding against a former interim UFC lightweight champion. And that's what they're going to try to spin.
Zen, no offense to your employer, but he's entering BJ Penn territory for losses.
Oh, I'm aware.
If he loses Ferguson to Paddy, he ties Penn's record for most consecutive losses. This is not good. This is bad. And they're throwing him in here. And that's my problem with 296, Sam. It's like what I said about why I favor 290 over 291, is that 291 had all the finishes, but the idea that they're continuing to let Tony Ferguson fight is like taking a bit out of me. Like, this is stupid on the UFC and Tony Ferguson's part. This is reckless on the UFC and Tony Ferguson's part. And if nobody is going to stop this, Tony Ferguson is going to continue to go down a bad path.
Well, no, and this is reckless on the part of NSAC also.
Yeah. And the State Athletic Commission, you're right. But of course, they're not going to do anything because State Athletic Commissions are freaking useless.
Of course. Well, so my opinion on 295 and 296, what more can I say? I can't wait for them. These fights are massive. At least the Yuri Pereira fight will give some clarity to the light heavyweight division. And because I never got a chance to ask you last week, does the winner of that fight Magomed, or does the winner of that fight rightfully so fight Jermell Charlo, hopefully in Chicago? What do you think?
I would love for Magomed Ankalaev to be in the title picture, but obviously the UFC wants no part of him in the title picture. It's going to be whoever wins this fight is defending against Jamal Hill.
Okay. But yeah, overall, I'm very excited for the end of the year. I'm excited for the pay-per-views that the UFC is coming up. And I think anyone who's an MMA fan, either hardcore or casual, as I said casual, and I know casual is sometimes taken with a negative context, but if you are hardcore or casual, there is no way you're not excited about the end of the year from a pay-per-view perspective for the UFC. No question about it.
Absolutely.
Assuming, of course, knock on wood, that every single major fight stays intact with no injuries, no suspensions, and that we don't need any of that.
Just knock on wood about 10 to 15 times. Make sure that none of that happens and everything stays intact. Please, fight gods, show some mercy, unlike the football gods.
That's true for both of our teams, I might add.
Yeah, and some fantasy players, I might add. Since we talked about Cedric Doumbe's fight before we get into the previews, let's talk about Canelo. I mean, bad on so many ends. And I really, I am not one, Zan, that I should say something like this, but because there's a whole bunch of boxing experts who are saying it, it really felt like Jermell Charlo was there for a paycheck. Now, granted, he was fighting 2 weight classes above the weight class where he holds a lot of gold. Granted, he was not the first Charlo to be offered this fight. This was supposed to be Jermell Charlo, and how Jermell Charlo is still the WBC middleweight champion, I have no idea.
Nobody knows.
And then Jermell Charlo just, I'm sorry, piss poor fight. I'm sorry. I know Canelo is a legend. Canelo definitely is one of the best in this sport, currently and of all time, but piss poor fight is really all I can say.
Well, even though the fight was bad, from an individual perspective, Canelo was masterful as he always is.
Absolutely. This fight, I'm with most people. This fight is more of a criticism against Jermell Charlo than it is anything against Canelo Alvarez.
Okay, so we're both on the same page there. How did you score the fight? I saw some people have a 10-2. I had it a perfect 12-0 sweep. How did you score it?
I could see maybe one round, like towards the middle where Canelo took a break, that I could give it to Charlo, but that's the thing. It's an 11-0 maximum for Charlo. Other than that, I could agree with you that it was a clean sweep.
And I'm just curious. I mean, obviously Vegas is known for having major September pay-per-views. They obviously could not get their Cinco de Mayo date. Is this more of a win for Canelo and a loss for Showtime, or the other way around? What do you think?
I think Canelo lost for Showtime. I think there's a bigger loser here. DAZN.
Yeah, so I can kind of talk about that. So for those who don't know, and for those who weren't following my Twitter feed, I watched the Canelo Charlo fight via the DAZN broadcast. And for those who weren't plugged into watching fights in other territories, it was revealed 2 days before the fight that Alvarez versus Charlo would be taking place on DAZN in the United Kingdom and Ireland. And because I was tech savvy enough, I was able to figure out how I could watch that exact feed in the United States from the comfort of my own home. I won't say how I did it, but I was able to see the DAZN feed in person. And unfortunately, like most of the regular audience in the United Kingdom and in Ireland, I missed round 3. Therefore, I saw 11 of the 12 rounds of the Canelo decision win. And from a DAZN perspective, again, for what feels like the 4th or 5th event in a row that we're talking about this, DAZN and its broadcast/streaming capabilities take a major hit during the main event of all sorts, during an event where there were no issues with the stream whatsoever until the main event, because of course there was. And I might add, in the UK and Ireland, the fight was free with a regular DAZN subscription. Unbelievable.
And here in the US, they tried to charge $85 for this.
Yep.
That's why I'm saying, like, I'm curious what the numbers are going to be, because from a fight perspective and, in the moment kind of perspective with, today's media age where everything is right here, right now, this card, Alvarez versus Charlo, was a failure.
Yeah. And I'll admit some of the undercard fights were good. There were a lot of nice prospects, but
the controversial co-main event.
Very, very, very controversial co-main event. And to be quite honest with you, that is the worst non-title fight scorecard in a boxing match that I have ever seen. What about you?
Good old NSAC.
Literally. Literally.
Oh, I hate this. Zain. Once again, like I was so hyped on boxing at the start of this show, and I have to bring it out.
Well, this is why we are primarily an MMA podcast, because of this exact reason right here. Because if we were primarily a boxing podcast, we would talk about how someone corrupt the entire sport is every week and never get off the soapbox. So there you go.
I should get for the sound effects. I should get Teddy Atlas saying the corruption in boxing soundbite from when he was on ESPN.
It's corrupt. It's broken. I've had it. He starts screwed. I've had it. He takes the head off. My goodness.
And I think actually I think some people find that way, feel that way about the NFL right now, thanks to all the Swifties and the Chiefs.
It's true. And for those of you who did not see the Sunday Night Football game, look it up because the ending was absolutely unbelievable. Unbelievable for the right reasons if you're a Chiefs fan, absolutely for the wrong reasons and wanting to break your television as fans oriented off into the NFL. But in case you haven't been living under a rock, Taylor Swift is the biggest thing in the world right now. So yeah.
Hey, that Sunday Night Football game was more entertaining than this fight by a long stretch.
100%, and even a casual sports observer who doesn't follow combat sports could say that with 100% certainty. So there you go.
But yeah, DAZN, an absolutely big loser. I kind of want to, Zan, I said I was going to cut back. Part of me wants to take that $20 of DAZN subscription a month and just kick it. And I mean kick it into the sun. Far into the sun, where it will burn up there and it will land there and I will never have to see it ever again. Because Jesus Christ.
Yeah, in my opinion, after all of DAZN's struggles, I think DAZN should just be an international platform at this point and be done.
Seriously. I mean, and it sucks because they had so much going for them. And then, I mean, first of all, part of this was COVID. Part of this is the, right. COVID. When 2020, they were supposed to have a big year and everything got shaken up because the world shut down, but they just didn't recover from it.
Right, and weren't they supposed to be the ones to eliminate pay-per-view altogether? Meaning you got one subscription and you got every single fight.
Right, the WWE Network kind of style. But no, now the UFC ESPN Plus style is one where you get a subscription and then you gotta pay again. And you wonder why people are pissed off. And you wonder why people like me are starting to cut back because Jesus Christ. And you also wonder why people are starting to use VPNs, or since they starting, but you're wondering why the VPN usage is about to get rampant.
No kidding.
Am I wrong?
And you also are wondering why people are starting to flock to AMZs instead of their own television sets to watch these fights because, quite frankly, it's cheaper to go to the bar or the movie theater to watch these in your own house.
The movie theater business might get saved because of how bad streaming and pay-per-view is.
Seriously?
The movie theater is taking a hit from streaming, but no, the idea of streaming and the idea of the pay-per-view and their crazy prices might actually give theater some new life. Jesus.
Well said.
All right.
Speaking of Showtime.
Well, let's go to something good. Let's go to Bellator 300. 3 title fights. Unfortunately, Ryan Bader versus Linton Vassell for the heavyweight title is not going to happen. Linton Vassell falls sick and is forced out of the fight, but we still have 3 title fights to discuss.
Yeah, I mean, starting out with this first one, jiu-jitsu specialist versus wrestler, and obviously someone with a lot of power. I mean, I think this is Usman Nurmagomedov's toughest test, and I think the longer the fight stays standing, the longer it favors Primus. But I like Usman Nurmagomedov in a 4th round submission. I think Primus makes it a long fight. I think he makes it a grueling fight. I think he puts Nurmagomedov in positions that he's never been in before, but I think it's going to be one mistake, either on the ground or standing up, that's going to turn the fight in Nurmagomedov's favor. And I actually think he gets Primus out of there with the 4th round rear naked choke. And I think it's just a high-level, action-packed fight where both guys are going to give it everything they have. And unfortunately, I like both guys. Someone has to lose. But I just simply think after watching Usman Nurmagomedov in person, this is, in my opinion, the best lightweight outside of the UFC by far. And I think this is his Grand Prix to lose. Tom, what do you think?
Yeah, this is going to be a grappling expert bout. You got, as you said, wrestler versus jiu-jitsu. This is definitely going to be fought a lot on the ground and in the clinch and against the cage. But in my opinion, Nurmagomedov is far and away the better grappler than Primus. I think Primus, like you said, is going to try and make it a fight. I just think Nurmagomedov is too good, and he is just at another level. And you know what they talk about with Dagestani wrestling versus American wrestling? How Dagestani wrestling is just a completely different field.
Oh, yeah.
So that's why I'm going to side with you on a submission. Nurmagomedov will get Primus out of there, will retain and advance to the final. I could see him being the 4th round. I could even see it being in the 3rd round. I could see it happening a little sooner.
Okay, do you see Primus hurting Nurmagomedov and potentially attempting to knock him out, or do you think Nurmagomedov will not get staggered at all in this fight?
I could see it happening maybe early, but even if it does happen, I think Nurmagomedov is going to recover. And like I said, he'll get Primus out of there one way or another.
Okay, so you have Usman Nurmagomedov moving on to the finals of the Grand Prix, assuming the finals of the Grand Prix continue as we hope they will.
Yeah, well, you're going to see the other semifinal in Chicago. That's the plan.
Which I'm very excited about. By the way, who do you have in an early prediction in the other semifinal on the opposite side? In your opinion, who's gonna win that?
Who's gonna win the Bellator 301 one?
Yeah, what do you think?
So that one is going to be who is it? Oh, Patricky Pitbull, Alexander can't pronounce his name. Shabli.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go with Patricky Pitbull just because I feel like Patricky Pitbull, he's the veteran, he's got a lot going on for him. But regardless, and I truthfully, of the remaining 4, I don't see anybody being Nurmagomedov.
I think so too. So this is what's going to happen. This fight is going to happen this weekend. Bellator 301, of course, happens in November, and I think they wait all the way until June, hopefully in Chicago again for the finals of the lightweight Grand Prix. That's my prediction. So hopefully I can see the end of this tournament in person. That's obviously me being a little bit biased, but I hope that's how Bellator puts it out. So yeah.
Okay. Let's move on now to the co-main event of this card. Both women's titles are on the line. It begins with the women's featherweight title, the return of Cris Cyborg. It has felt like forever since we've last seen her in the octagon. I mean, in the cage. And Zain, remember what she said after one of her most recent fights? She did say about potential opponents. Obviously, Kayla Harrison is a potential target. And now with the Bellator PFL merger talks, that idea isn't dead completely yet, but you can't be, I think she quoted something along the lines of, you can't be scared of the cat. And now, Zain, the cat is out of the bag because Cris Cyborg will fight Kat Zingano for the women's featherweight championship. And, I think Cris Cyborg, I think this fight is really interesting. I think some of the older school women's MMA fans are going to get a kick out of this fight. I think this will be fun, but I think Cris Cyborg is just, she's one of the best. She is in top tier of women's MMA fighters for a reason. And I think Cyborg gets it done 1st or 2nd round TKO.
Yeah, I mean, it's great to see Kat Zingano in this position, considering what a pioneer to women's MMA that she is. But Cris Cyborg, at this moment in time, is just on another level. And now with Amanda Nunes out of the picture, it's clear who the best female fighter in the world is, in my personal opinion. And I think Cris Cyborg gets it done. I'm going to say round 2 TKO. I think Kat Zingano makes it interesting. She may even attempt to take her down. She may even get her down, but I just think Cyborg's hand speed is going to be too quick for her, and I think she wins in very impressive and very vicious fashion. So
yeah, perfect. You and I agree the same. The remaining title fight, women's flyweight title. You got champ versus champ. You got, Zain, friends and former teammates battling. Liz Carmouche taking on the former champion, Ilima-Lei McFarlane. Truth be told, I'm happy for Ilima-Lei. I'm happy she's getting this fight. I think this is going to be really interesting considering both women know one another. But up until her most recent fights, I hadn't really been impressed with Ilima-Lei. She definitely had taken a step back after losing her championship the first time. And I shouldn't say the first time, losing her championship. And now she's getting the opportunity to get it back. But Liz Carmouche has just, she's on a roll. And I think there's momentum is a real thing in this sport. And I see I see Ilima-Lei making it a little competitive, but I'm going to go with Carmouche by a decision to retain the title.
Yeah, Carmouche by decision seems to be the safe bet here. Unless Ilima McFarland worked on her wrestling and worked on her jiu-jitsu in camp, which I'm sure she did to stifle Liz's attacks. I think it's going to be a fight that I think a lot of experts are predicting to go a certain way, and that certain way is exactly what you said. I just think Liz controls every second of the fight, and maybe Ilima-Lei gets a little bit of life in round 3 and round 4 where Liz gasses, and maybe Ilima-Lei hurts her with the right hand or something. But outside of that, I think Liz wins. I think she does it impressively, and I think she puts a stamp on her dominance as the best Bellator flyweight in the world. And at this point, it seems to me like no one can beat her. No one can beat her outside of the UFC, which is good to see, considering that earlier in her career, she was known for, being the one to not get past Ronda Rousey to become the inaugural women's bantamweight champion. So it's nice to see that she's doing better in a different weight division. So we'll see how this goes. But yeah, I'm with you. I think Carmouche wins by decision, and I think she gasses Ilima-Lei out and either eventually finishes her or just kind of out wrestles her and wins the fight that way. So
perfect. And then what are a fight to talk about? UFC Vegas 80 this weekend. I mean, Zan, you and I looked at the card. I mean, it has some solid names on it, but it feels like it needs a little something, needs a little spice, because no offense to these two guys, but Grant Dawson versus Bobby Green just doesn't sound like a main event. It sounds like, kind of what it is, an Apex main event.
Yeah, I'm going to say Bobby Green by controversial split decision here. I think there's going to be a lot of interesting back and forths. I think Bobby Green is going to land a few more significant strikes, but Grant Dawson is going to out-wrestle Bobby Green, and for some reason, I think the judges are going to think that effective striking is better than effective grappling, and I think we're going to have some robbery madness at the Apex Shades of Kai Kara France a couple months ago.
I mean, it wouldn't be the first time that grappling got disrespected from the judges. That being said, Grant Dawson, UFC veteran who is actually undefeated in the UFC since he came into the promotion after winning on season 1 of Dana White's Contender Series. His only loss is in a Kansas City promotion back in, was it 2016.
Yeah.
Some of the names that he's fought: Julian Rosa, Ricky Glenn. That was actually a draw. That's the sole blemish, the non-win of his UFC run. Jared Gordon.
That's a fight that I thought Grant Dawson won, and I'm pretty sure you agreed too. Is that correct?
Yes. And then his most recent 3: Jared Gordon, Mark Madsen, Damir Ismagulov. But Bobby Green is going to be probably the most experienced fight veteran that Dawson has ever faced.
Yeah, but would you also argue though that Bobby Green isn't really a step up in competition given the guys that you just listed? Because to me, it doesn't seem like it.
No, it doesn't, and that's why I think, Zan, I'm going to lean in a different direction. I definitely could see something controversial happen because Nevada, judging, but I'm going to try and be optimistic. I'm going to try and be, we started with positivity on the show. We should try to end on positivity. So I'm going to say Grant Dawson, unanimous decision, gets it done.
Okay. Yeah, no doubt. It'll be a very interesting and high-octane fight, in a fight that could go a lot of different ways. There's no question about it.
And then there's also somebody else who's competing on this card this weekend. Big co-main event spot for him. As he takes on, I believe he's taking on Abdul Razak Al Hassan. It's the one and only Joe Pyfer.
Yeah, it's the one and only Joe Pyfer, the guy that we end every single show with. So, of course, I think we're going to be in unanimous agreement. I think Joe Pyfer wins an absolute slugfest against Al Hassan, and I actually think Joe Pyfer gets it done with a late 3rd round TKO. What do you think?
Yeah, I could definitely see. I might even see 2nd round TKO.
Okay.
I think Joe he's got what it takes. As Dana always said, be Joe Pyfer.
Be Joe Pyfer, and if you want to watch the people's main event, that is certainly your people's main event. this weekend in the world of the UFC. That's gonna do it for all the previews, though, and that's gonna do it for us for episode 55 of the MMA Outsiders. Thank you again to everyone who tuned in. Before both Tom and I get out of here, be sure to like and subscribe. Be sure to follow the Empty the Bench Podcast Network across social media at ETB Network, and of course, be sure to follow the show accounts at MMA Outsiders ETB. Again, my name is Zain Bando. I am a staff writer for BJPenn.com and a member of the Bellator Rankings panel. You can find my work on Twitter over at ZanBando99. And then, of course, to my left, Tom Albano, a contributor over at Fanside and MMA, and, of course, doing excellent work for the PFL website as the season is coming to an end both in the United States and elsewhere. And, of course, you can follow him on Twitter at Thomas J. Albano. That's going to do it for us. Thank you again for tuning in. We had a lot of news and notes, but we also had a bunch of previews this week. We're going to be excited to recap them next week in episode 56. Tom, I'm going to let you have the floor for the last few minutes. Any other exciting things you'd like to tell our loyal listeners before we get out of here?
Just thank you for tuning in to another edition of the MMA Outsiders. I got to say, it was good to be back. We had that 1 week off, but Zan, as you know, we are about to enter a time period where it is going to get crazy between all the big fights we have this weekend. Next weekend, we have a UFC card and a boxing match that I thought was probably going to get canceled with all the litigation, and just a fight that I really don't necessarily care about next weekend. But the weekend after that, we have the UFC in Abu Dhabi, which means an earlier start time, which means the card can actually end. I can actually have a Saturday night free. And then we've got later on this month, Francis Ngannou and Tyson Fury in Saudi Arabia, which means I could have another Saturday night free.
Yeah, and then which means, unfortunately for you, November is going to be insanely busy for you and insanely busy for both of us because I will have in-person coverage in the middle of the month for Bellator 301. So,
absolutely.
Even though there's a lot happening in October, there's a lot of breathing room in October, which I guess is good for us because November is just going to be way too nuts. Yeah,
absolutely. And cheap plug, by the way, non-MMA cheap plug. Nick Morgeson, Johnny Montalbano, and I will be live streaming this Sunday morning the second NFL London game of the year. We'll be live streaming. We'll be doing a little, watch along of the Bills versus Jaguars game that takes place in London, 9:30 a.m. Eastern time, 6:30 a.m. Pacific time. So tune in on Sunday for those of you who are football fans. And pip pip cheerio, as they say over in England.
Yeah, tune in on Sunday for the watch along, and for those who are looking for the game, you can find it exclusively on the NFL Network. Again, it will not be on ESPN Plus. It is exclusive to NFL Network. So for those of you who
no Toy Story feed this time around.
No Toy Story feed this time around. For those of you who are fans of the Jaguars or Bills, be sure to get up early. Otherwise, you will miss the game entirely. So there you go.
For sure. All right. I'm getting out of here. We're getting out of here. For Zan, I'm Tom. We'll see you next time on the MMA Outsiders. Take care, everyone.
Take care, everyone. And before we get out of here and tell you to enjoy the fights, we want to remind you one last time to be Joe Pyfer.
Be Joe Pyfer and watch Joe Pyfer fight this weekend.
100%. Those were your only two homework assignments, so we expect you that both of them get completed by the time we're back on the air next week. We'll see you guys then.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.